Welcome to Frisky, a podcast on everything marketing and sexuality.
Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of Frisky. Today we have with us Clarissa Smith, Professor of Media and Sexual Cultures at Northumbria University. Thank you so much for joining us, Clarissa. We're really excited to have you and talk about porn studies.
Thank you very much. I'm very glad to be here.
Yeah, so many questions. Like in preparing this episode, we actually thought maybe this is gonna last an hour, but we'll try and keep it nice and short. So in your bio, let's start from the basics. In your bio, you say that you study how people access and engage with pornographic material and sexualized products. And I got really interested in what are these sexualized products and are they changing? So since you started working on them, have they changed?
Yeah, I mean, well, clearly, when I started or entered this field of research, well, ideas around pornography were very different to what they might be now. It can be, with the ubiquity of the internet, it's quite difficult to think of a time when, there wasn't the kind of access that we see now. And of course, there were things that kind of functioned as forms of there were forms of culture which were about sexual excitement, but without actually being labelled pornography, right? So, I mean, thinking about the ways that romance novels, for example, 1980s, a number of writers were talking about the ways in which porn for women was different from that for men, that because of the lack of access of porn for women, then women were turning to things that seemed to be quite respectable forms of novel or short story that they could access easily, and that these were written in a way that they mimicked, they'd be about seduction, and they would mimic the rhythms and the kind of organization of sexual excitement to orgasm, right? And we talk constantly about porn now, as if that's the only kind of material that's available that people might engage with for sexual excitement. But actually, lots of other things have functioned in that way. We talk about pornography as if it's simply one thing, but actually, it can be lots of different things for different people. There's a tendency to constantly talk about it as something that's visual, that it's audio-visual material, and that nothing else really counts because it's not as explicit as the kind of material we see online these days. But, porn has always been a contested genre, really, and the term pornography is often used as a label that's used to draw boundaries about what we consider to be acceptable, right? So it's, one of the ways in which that boundary is drawn is not necessarily about its form or its style, but by moral judgment, right? So, I mean, it's important, I think, sometimes that we remember that porn isn't just audio-visual material, moving image that appears online, that it is a whole range of things, including, for example, sexually explicit podcasts, where people are just talking about sex, but talking about it in ways that actually is about sexual excitement and interest, right? And I think also, that
I also wanted to ask you, how are these shifting boundaries between public and private, how are they influencing how people navigate access to the genre?
Well, I guess how do people navigate? I mean, there still are, despite some of the kind of fear-mongering around, the idea that people have unlimited access to porn, there's still all kinds of ways in which people feel quite limited around their access. And it is absolutely the case that people can, with their mobile phone, access material that you'd have had to travel miles to get in the past, that you'd have had gatekeepers, as in, there'd be a shopkeeper you'd have had to navigate. You might have had to navigate the public space in a way that felt very exposing of you and potentially full of shame, which you don't have to do any longer because, people are using their mobile phones and can get access with just a few clicks. That doesn't alter the fact that people still have their own boundaries about public and private. It still is the case that most people are not all that open about their engagements with pornography. They're not telling everybody in their families that within relationships. There's still an awful lot of stigma about why are you engaging with porn? I mean, it is a complex and at times I think intensely personally political kind of activity, right? And for some people, it is possible to talk about engaging with porn and that's an expression of their political stance around sexuality, while for others, it's something that has to be absolutely kept hidden and can't be referred to. So, I think we are seeing redrawing of those lines between public and private in some ways, but I don't see them as disappeared. I think they've moved into different spaces. Yeah.
So interesting, honestly. And while you were talking, I thought, well, how does one start, a career in studying pornography, first of all, and how did you get there? And the other question I have in mind, which is connected, because it's such a political topic, as you said, and intimate and maybe controversial, how does one study? Like, what are the methods to study pornography and pornographic consumption?
Right. Well, actually, where it started was that I was working for an advertising agency, and I received, the press packs from a couple of magazines. That just happened all the time. We were receiving press packs. The idea that would any of our clients want to advertise with magazines that were being launched. And on this particular day, I received in the mail mock-ups of 3 titles that were going to be released by the same publisher, Northern and Shell, which were softcore magazines aimed at women. And I was at that time doing a part-time MA, and we had just had lectures about how porn was really bad for women, and that women have no interest in pornographic material. And it was kind of like, what is this then? Here's a theory, here's a reality, a commercial reality actually, that a company has thought that there is a market out there. So this would have been 1993, 94. And so, that's what started me off. I was just really interested. I started following that. The fact was that in the same kind of period of about 4 months, a total of 6 magazines were published aimed at women. And this is also along with things like the Ex Libris imprint of books, and Black Lace books came out then. This was a time when the Chippendales were still in an ascendant, so there were all these ways in which women were being addressed as sexual consumers, and yet actually a whole range of other things were telling me that women had no interest in this. So it was just, that was part of the issue there for me. And also alongside that, well, I did a humanities degree for my first degree, and I'd kind of kept up with some of the things that had been going on there, and I'd been really interested by work by people like Janice Radway, her work on women reading the romance. And so I just was really interested in these sets of paradoxes, really, I guess they were, and kind of what is happening here, because clearly something had shifted around women's interest in sexually explicit material. And I think that there's, you know, in some ways that, you know, that address to women in those magazines was really interesting to me, because it seemed like what we were seeing was a changing way of thinking about desire. One that was being marketed to women, but also that actually perhaps there were changes that women were feeling themselves around the, I guess, some management of desire, the pleasures of desire, ideas of belonging as a desiring person, you know, all of those things. So where I started off from was a project that was about engaging with women audiences for these magazines. So that's where my research started, and I was lucky enough to work with someone who, so for my PhD, which I then applied for and everything else, he had done work on horror films and the moral panic around horror films, and also was really interested in audiences of things like action comic, and, you know, so I've been working with audiences of cultural products that weren't regarded badly. So he's just very interested in me working with him. It was my own project. He wasn't actually involved in that PhD except as a supervisor, but, you know, he's an incredible facilitator of my research, and, you know, really pushing me to move beyond some of the kind of standard ways of thinking about porn, and actually recognizing the ways in which porn is a cultural form, really, and that it tells us a lot about current mores around sex and gender and power, you know, and that clearly it was, it operates at that cusp, really, between freedom, let's do some alliteration here, freedom, fantasy, and fear, right? You know, that people are, some people are engaging with it because, you know, it offers them a sense of something new and different and wonderful and also scary at the same time often, and that, you know, it speaks to different fantasies, so, you know, I was just really interested in how sexual media circulates, who it's for, and what it tells us about who gets to have pleasure and who doesn't. And, you know, it's quite easy to forget how much sort of worry there was around things like black lace novels, you know, that people will, what do women do? I mean, they're reading romance that's got explicit sex in it. Is this good for women? You know, those kinds of things. Lots of the questions that are asked about online pornography now were being asked back then in our supposedly gentler times, although those gentler times were much more sexist and unforgiving, really, I guess, towards women who expressed sexual interest, you know. So yeah, that's where it started. You asked about methods. Well, the methods I mean, you know, the methods have come from a whole range of different areas. You know, there's bits borrowed from film studies, media studies, cultural studies, gender studies, you know, because actually porn studies isn't just a singular thing. You know, you can't, one of the things about the editing the journal is just how many different kinds of people are interested in exploring aspects of porn, whether it's audiences or production, textual formations of it, how it circulates, legal aspects. There's a whole range of areas that you can investigate. Marketing is an area that's really interesting as well, because it, in some ways, marketing is about managing the notion of stigma actually around pornography, right? In order to sell the product, how do we market this product as for women, for example, or as different, or as distinctive from other kinds of material that's gone forward. If there is a place for a reference, actually, Jane Juffer's book At Home with Pornography is a really interesting exploration of how certain kinds of sexually explicit content of different kinds, different products, were sort of rendered safe and tamed so that they could come into the home and be kind of domesticated. And those are all things that I've found incredibly interesting over my career and wanted to investigate. And that does mean that you end up in spaces, intellectual spaces, that you're sort of running in and nicking a bit off the shelves and then running out, without hoping that you're not going to kind of collapse the whole edifice around yourself. Because it's can't learn everything in those spaces, but there may be something that's really interesting that you want to carry forward for understanding something about but ways consumption works or whatever. So
this is really interesting to hear your journey studying this space. We also read your recent article with Fiona Attwood on the 10 years of the journal Porn Studies. Can you tell us a little bit about your journey with creating a journal dedicated to the critical academic study of pornography?
Yeah, Fiona and I have been collaborators for more than 2 decades, and she's a fantastic partner to work with. I've been really lucky actually in who I've been able to collaborate with, and in fact she was introduced to me by my PhD supervisor, whose name I didn't mention earlier, so I will now, Martin Barker, who was a professor at Aberystwyth University, before that Sussex. And so we were introduced, and in that kind of way that sometimes people can be a little bit wary of each other and thinking, oh, we're in the same territory, is this going to be a good thing, is she going to be a competitor? And I don't know that she felt that way about me actually, but I certainly have this kind of competitive streak, so it's like, I don't know. And then I thought, actually, this could be just amazing if we were to, set that aside, Clarissa, it's not your best look. And we started just collaborating, just sharing conversations actually. And one of those, of course, would be, wouldn't it be fantastic if there was a journal on pornography? Because in many ways, I think Fiona and I share a real sense that, there's so much more that could be understood about pornography if only, we were able to open it up to true interdisciplinarity, and so the journal became something that we kept talking about. I think I must have met her in about 2003, might even have been a bit earlier than that. And we kept talking about it. We had some chats with publishers who were just absolutely, no, there won't be a journal of that kind. Why do we need one of that sort? There's plenty of journals that are on, around sexuality, and you can just, there's film studies, there's other kinds of journals that you can, you can just send work to there. And then we met with Kath Burton from Routledge. In fact, she got in touch with us and just asked if we'd like to come and have a meeting with her to just talk about ideas. And she was just an incredible editor, really, and really wanted us to move it forward, the idea of a journal forward once we talked to her about that. But that was 2012. So we'd already been talking for like nearly a decade about the need for a journal. And then things, we had to put together a proposal, and that seemed to take a long time. It was coming backwards and forwards. And then suddenly we got it's a go. And we want the first issue out in, I think we've got something like 4 months, and we hadn't considered what would go in it, at least for the first issue, because we'd just always been focused on the idea that it'll never happen. So we had to race very fast to get people to submit things to us. But I mean, it has in fact worked very well, and we have been able, I think, to really broaden out some of the ways that people think about porn studies. And I mean, I think there's still loads more that could be done, but it is fantastic, I think, to have a journal that's dedicated to thinking about pornography in all its specificities, and not debating whether or not it has the right to exist, which, unfortunately did seem to be the way that everybody kind of talked about porn for a long time. And I'm not saying that that's the case now, but, it did always seem to be that if you found a really good article in one of the adjacent discipline journals, it would always nearly always have to deal with the issue of whether or not porn should exist, or whether it's a good thing or a bad thing. And we don't need our authors to do any of that. Porn exists, and people are interested in researching it and in engaging with and understanding it, and that's what we are trying to facilitate there. And I think that's it's been really important, particularly for thinking about opening up the conversation so that they're more global and diverse than they used to be. That it's not just Anglo-American dominated. It's not just dominated by Anglo-American pornography as the object of investigation, but also it's the whole field is not just dominated by Anglo-American discussion, and the other ways of thinking are coming in. So it's, and I think that can, hopefully that can, become ever more, that's part of the future for porn studies. Moves on, and it will inevitably move on, I think. And right at this moment, one of the things that's particularly important is around the digital platforms and various nations' interests in regulating and how those are operating across the globe. And while at some level there are real similarities between the ways different nations are talking and seeming to respond to massive online platforms, they're not all the same, and that there are differences in approach and ways of thinking about what to do about pornography.
I think you should be really proud for platforming a whole stream of research, really. Like 10 years of a journal, like, it's such a tremendous achievement, isn't it? And so thank you for sharing the journey. I think maybe it's a dream in the future, to start your own journal. You said something that really struck me, that porn, I mean, probably obvious for those working in the field, that porn is a cultural form. and tells loads about, society. If you could sort of eyeball it, what current, pornography tells about us, tells about contemporary society?
Ooh. Well, I guess actually the most obvious thing is about the OnlyFans, camming, forms of amateur porn. I mean, they tell us about the creator economy, right? I mean, that's, they're not separate from the creator economy. They are a part of it. And, the self is the product. That's one of the things. It's part of influence culture, where people are offering access and forms of authenticity, and what we've got as well are really phenomenal gig workers actually working on OnlyFans. The kinds of articles that you see in the mainstream press about, oh, she takes her clothes off and she makes £1 million a month or something, are just such they're so one-dimensional and completely misunderstand what work it takes to be on OnlyFans, right? I mean, that's, and the fact that people are operating, the self as a brand, for sure, but also they're their own makeup artists, script writers, they're doing the technical work. They're managing their online presence elsewhere, their social media. I mean, this is phenomenal. Sorry, I can't even get my words out there. It's phenomenal activity, right? I mean, and really entrepreneurial skills that fail to get recognised. And I think that's one of the things that we're seeing there. And then this idea as well, that we're also seeing the ways in which precarity has become a key aspect of everyday life, and that also intimacy, the ways that's bound up in that precarity as well. So those are kind of within those structures. In terms of our fantasies, I think, I think it'd be very hard to now talk really about single kinds of fantasy. Though I think that it probably does remain that much of porn is really about who is it? Who is it? What is it? How does it happen that you can meet with somebody and end up having, a sexual encounter with them? I mean, at heart, that's a key kind of fantasy. And of course, that changes depending on what kind of porn you're viewing, right? In queer porn, it's about recognition of really of authenticity, of creating a safe space for kind of nuanced exploration of what it means to be different bodies and different desires, exploration of those. Whereas, of course, in more clearly heterosexual material, it may be, fantasies of sex outside of marriage, the possibilities of moving beyond certain boundaries and respectability. Do you know what I mean? But they are, both of them, explorations of being rule bound in some sense, and what might it mean to break those rules. And of course, there's also plenty of material that plays very painfully at the edges of what's permissible in our culture. And I don't want to make it sound like everything is hunky-dory and it's all okay. But I think that one of the things that we have to recognize is that, violence is a part of our world, our real world, and therefore it will find its way into fantasy materials as well, and in ways that many people find very distressing and upsetting, and problematic. And we need to think about that and talk about it. Yeah. Yes. I mean, yeah, I think I'm probably exhausting myself there without, going into real detail about something. It gets a bit difficult to kind of really fully explain.
No, thank you. It's really interesting to hear your thoughts around what the genre is telling us about our society at the moment, and it's also really interesting to think about the gig economy and all these creators and how they navigate those platforms and those spaces. We recently saw on TikTok, for example, there was a little bit of backlash towards one creator who would share a lavish lifestyle, and essentially she came online and talked about how she cannot maintain her house, even though the way that she gathered her wealth and stardom was through creating OnlyFans content, but also by sharing her life on TikTok. So I think this is really interesting to explore these dynamics, and also your recent special issue on porn celebrity was very interesting in that domain. And I wanted to ask you, when it comes to these pornographic media and also people and specific creators that navigate the spaces between platforms that are dedicated to the creation of pornographic materials such as OnlyFans, but then having a presence on Instagram or TikTok, how is stardom within those spheres maintained?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, actually. It's a yeah. I think that the work on stardom is only really, porn stardom is only really just beginning, actually, because I think that in the past, talking about a porn star was basically to just talk about the size of their breasts, the amount of hair they had, and not much more than that, and not really thinking about the ways in which different performers actually create a whole persona around themselves, right? And actually they've been doing this for years, and because that narrative that often gets talked about, that these are women who are, and it nearly always is about women when people have been talking about porn stardom, that somehow they're degraded by the work, that they're fake, that it's none of this is real, that they don't understand what they're really doing, the kind of idea that they're not at all savvy or interesting. It's just such nonsense, really, because they are performers, they are people who are deploying skills in under quite difficult circumstances, right? I mean, that idea that somehow you just take your clothes off and you just have sex. I mean, I don't know about you, but I don't even like posing for family photographs, right? I mean, I find that very difficult to do, let alone the possibility that I would be moving and interacting with one or more people while naked in order to perform sexiness to people beyond the camera. I mean, it is a skill of acting that's, and at the same time needing to produce authenticity and a sense of desire, that this is real for me. So there's a whole range of things that I think performers have to do. And of course that's true of people whether or not they're on TikTok or on OnlyFans, that it is about speaking to your audience in very real ways, in ways that connect with the audience. And of course, that, we can theorize that as forms of pseudo intimacy, but it is a real skill to be able to do that, right? And to move across different platforms where you're both a performer who is in X-rated, to use that old-fashioned term, X-rated films, but also to do it on TikTok where you're fully clothed and you're yeah, if I had those skills, but I don't. I mean, this is a reality that in order to create your brand and your persona, you need to have those skills as a performer, and also the ways that I think that porn stars also have lots of other things that are kind of layered on them, and I think that was one of the things that we hoped the journal special issue would highlight, was that porn stars at different times function in different ways. That sometimes they're activists, other times they might be kind of they're the carriers of broader cultural anxieties. Other times they're standing up against the would-be president of the United States, right? One of the few people who refused to be silenced by the juggernaut of PR that he unleashed on her, but actually mobilized her stardom in order to keep her accusations at the forefront. I mean, I think, it's, yeah. I'm not sure if I answered your question there, did I?
You did, and I think we could probably go on for another couple of hours.
Yeah.
And maybe we will, in a future episode, maybe we will. So Clarissa, thank you so much for being with us today. We really enjoyed terrific conversation today. And yeah, hopefully we will have you in the future. And in the meanwhile, make sure to those listening that you followed this episode. Make sure that you like this episode and follow us on Frisky.
Thank you so much, Clarissa, for joining us, and thank you everyone for listening. Another episode of Frisky. We'll see you next week. Bye.
Bye.